Also, it is the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. I can't believe it has been that long. It's sort of terrifying to me in some respects. 30 years ago, about, I don't know, 1 million people, was it? Or that showed up in the, was it 1 million people?
I believe it was 1 million
Yeah.
people. I mean, if you think of population proportion-wise.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to sort of like figure out these numbers because it's not like the Chinese government was out there advertising. But hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people, gathered, protested all around the country, but particularly in Tiananmen Square. They were pro-democracy protesters. And
pro-labor as well. It's one of the lesser-known parts of that history.
On June 3rd, the night of June 3rd, tanks moved into the square, and there was a famous, people I'm sure have seen the video, of a man who basically ran out in front of the tanks and stopped the tanks. He only stopped the tanks probably for, I don't know, about 3 minutes. Eventually, some other people came by, and it was never clear to me whether they were his friends or they were some type of like plainclothes agents of the state who ushered him away, and the tanks rolled on. It is unclear how many people were killed when the tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square because, of course, the Chinese government was not going to release that information either. Mike Pompeo made some remarks that were saying to the effect of China has a problem with human rights. Whenever it serves their interests, they will abuse human rights. I mean, the idea that anyone from the Trump administration, which is hosted Duterte and Bolsonaro and others, Putin, MBS, would have a problem with human rights. Netanyahu is sort of laughable, but nevertheless, they went through the motions, and then the Chinese rebuked Pompeo, et cetera, et cetera. But more importantly, let's listen back. Now, this is, I don't know if we have any contemporaneous comments from Donald Trump on Tiananmen Square. Maybe they'll show up. But what we do have is an interview with Donald Trump from, what magazine was this from?
Playboy magazine.
Playboy magazine.
1990.
In 1990. And for those people who think that Donald Trump has, in his old age, became more authoritarian, this is 30 years ago when Donald Trump was probably about, 40-ish? 40-something? And back then, in 1990, what were your impressions of the Soviet Union? Their system is a disaster. I was very unimpressed. And then in talking about Tiananmen Square when it comes to China, because he said the problem with Gorbachev, not a firm enough hand. He says, you mean firm hand as in China? And Trump had this to say. When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious. They were horrible. But they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength. Our country is right now perceived as weak, as being spit on by the rest of the world. This was 30 years ago. This seems to be a theme of his for a long time. But both the authoritarian sort of like longing and the notion that somehow our country's being spit on.
Well, he says at another part in the interview when he talks about how weak Gorbachev is, but he also says, generally a lot of these of their representatives are tougher and smarter than ours.
Yeah.
He said that 30 years ago. I want to just say, just 30 seconds. There was a slightly Gorbachev-like figure in China named, I'm just going to forgive me, I'm absolutely going to mispronounce this, but his name was Zhao Ziyang, and he was the party premier, and he discouraged the protesters, but he had an open line of dialogue with them and was resisting a call to ruthlessly crack down on them. And eventually, he got sidelined and overruled and went from being at the top of the pyramid to totally politically marginalized the last years of his life.
That's what we get for being weak.
Because he was weak. Right.
So it's nice to know that Donald Trump has been consistent throughout his career. That's always encouraging. But there it is, 30 years, Tiananmen Square. I wonder if actually Trump will mention Tiananmen Square, and I wonder, frankly, if he'll mention the end of Ramadan.
I'm going to go, the first one all depends on how the latest phone conversation with Xi went, and the second one, no.
A lot of chocolate cake.
Someone just in the Discord of TMBS, I have to say, I don't know if we would put this up, but somebody helpfully found us the cover photo of that issue of Playboy, which will add to the vulgarity and hilariousness of this if you want to see.
Very nice.
Jesus, I don't think I need to see that. Not this
wanna
early in
see
the
it.
morning.
Sorry, this is really bad, but it's...
Also, okay, I can feel the contrarian takes coming, but it is somewhat refreshing, at least, to see a representative of U.S. empire who's not pretending that he cares about human rights.
Yes, that has always been. He said something to that effect too, and I think in terms of oil, I can't remember what it was, but I do remember tweeting out one time like, "This is the most honest thing that any." Yes.
Yeah, this is why all the neocons hate him.
Indeed, he's not hiding the ball. Oof, Jesus.
It's funny.
It's still refreshing
It says the Donald
to
Trump
hear his
interview.
endorsement of the Tiananmen crackdown.
It says Donald Trump interview, and the next story is rock and racism. Has the dark side taken over pop music? Oh yeah, I'll be reading that. Has the dark side? I'm concerned about the dark side.
Thanks for putting that on top. I like that. Appreciate that.